Alright, let's get into it because this right here is the kind of story that makes the room go quiet, makes folks lean in, and makes the powerful people in high offices shift uncomfortably in their chairs. You ever see a moment where the balance of power changes in real time, where somebody, without even trying to show off, just says or does something so sharp, so precise, so full of truth, that it cuts through all the fake smiles and diplomatic nonsense? That's exactly what happened here. Now, this ain't just some friendly disagreement over tea. This is about the kind of move that breaks decades of political handshakes, photo ops, and those empty press conference smiles. See, the United States and India on paper, they've been strategic partners. Big trade, big defense deals, technology exchange, joint exercises, the whole show. But what people don't see is that under all that, there's always been this little tension, this hidden game of chess. Washington wants India to play by its rules, and India has been smiling politely while quietly writing its own playbook. And here's where it gets wild. One Indian, just one, walked into the room and flipped the script so hard the U.S. didn't even see it coming. This wasn't a prime minister. This wasn't a defense chief. This wasn't some billionaire tech mogul. This was someone who understood exactly where the nerve was and pushed on it without blinking. The kind of moment that leaves world leaders saying, "Wait, did that just happen? Let me tell you, Trump, and you can love him or hate him, that's your business," is a man who doesn't like losing face. He likes being the one with the power in the room. But when he revealed this truth, you could hear in his tone that something had genuinely rattled him. He admitted it, almost in disbelief. Because America, for the first time in a long time, had to sit there and realize India wasn't just a partner. India had just reminded them they are an equal, maybe even a competitor, and that changes the whole game. See, here's the part nobody wants to talk about. For decades, U.S. foreign policy toward countries like India has been about influence, not friendship. You give a little aid here, you sign some big military deal there, you throw around terms like shared values and mutual respect. But what they really want is leverage. They want to be the big brother in the room, making sure every smaller sibling knows exactly where they stand, and it works, until it doesn't. This one Indian. And I'm telling you, history is going to remember their words basically told the U.S. Your rules don't apply here. Your pressure doesn't work here. And if you think you can treat us like some junior partner, you're about to be very disappointed. Not in a loud, dramatic way. In a calm matter-of-fact way that makes it hit twice as hard. You gotta understand, America isn't used to that. They're used to people nodding, agreeing, and then quietly grumbling behind closed doors. But India is a civilization that's seen empires rise and fall for thousands of years. Do you really think they're going to be intimidated by a nation that's barely 250 years old? They've dealt with colonizers, conquerors, invaders, and they're still here, stronger than ever. You can't lecture a country like that about survival or strategy. And here's the kicker. The U.S. actually thought they could put pressure on India by playing hardball on trade, on defense imports, on energy policy. They thought if they dangled certain deals in front of India, they could force them to choose sides in the global game, especially with China and Russia in the picture. But what happened? India looked them dead in the eye and basically said, "We'll buy from whoever we want. We'll trade with whoever we want. We'll decide our alliances based on what's good for us, not what's convenient for you." That's the moment Trump was talking about. That's the shocking truth. America tried to corner India, and instead they found themselves face to face with a country that doesn't flinch. That's why relations destroyed is not an exaggeration. It's not that they won't talk anymore. It's that the old dynamic, the one where the U.S. called the shots and India nodded along, is gone. Now let's get real for a second. When a country like the U.S. realizes they can't control the narrative anymore, they don't take it well. They start looking for ways to undermine, to influence public opinion, to stir up trouble. They'll fund media stories questioning India's policies. They'll push human rights concerns. In international forums, they'll suddenly become deeply interested in domestic issues they ignored for years. And if you think that's just paranoia, go ask every other country that tried to stand on its own 2 feet against Washington's agenda. But India's not playing defense here. They're playing offense without even raising their voice. Look at the moves they've been making, building stronger ties with Russia for energy, with France for defense, with the Middle East for trade, with Africa for resources. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket, and that scares the U.S. more than anything. Because in geopolitics, the minute you stop depending on one big power, you stop being easy to control. And here's the beautiful part, this isn't about hating America or wanting to burn bridges. It's about respect. Real partnerships are built on equality, and India is showing the world, we don't want to be your enemy, but we won't be your pawn. That's a dangerous idea for the U.S., because if one nation pulls it off successfully, others start thinking, hey, maybe we can do that too. Trump admitted it in his own way that this shook the foundation. And you better believe there are people in Washington right now scrambling to figure out how to fix this. But the thing is, you can't undo this kind of shift. Once the world sees a country stand up like that, you can't go back to the way it was. And let's not kid ourselves, there will be consequences. The U.S. might delay defense deals, drag its feet on technology transfers, or suddenly start favoring Pakistan in certain conversations just to send a message. That's how power politics works. But India's already calculated that risk. They're already making sure they don't need American approval to move forward. And the one Indian who sparked this, they didn't just speak for themselves, they spoke for 4 billion people who are tired of being told what they can and can't do. You know why this hits so hard, because it's not just about politics, it's about dignity. It's about a nation saying, we've earned our seat at the table, and we're not going to beg to keep it. That's what makes superpowers nervous, not weapons, not armies, but the unshakable self-confidence of a country that knows its worth. And here's where I'm gonna leave you with something to think about in the years ahead. You're going to see a lot of narratives, a lot of analysis from experts about how U.S.-India relations cooled, or shifted, or rebalanced. But don't let the polite language fool you. What really happened is that the old hierarchy got blown up in one conversation, by one person, at one moment in history. And that's the kind of thing you can't undo with another photo op or another handshake. America's going to have to deal with a new reality, and the rest of the world, they just saw proof that standing your ground works if you have the courage, the leverage, and the vision to back it up. Now, the question is how many more nations are about to follow that example. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation, a turning point that reshaped how nations looked at the global balance of power. For decades, the U.S. had projected an image of unshakable authority, the ultimate decision maker in matters of war, peace, and trade. Countries were expected to either align themselves with Washington or be sidelined, sanctioned, or painted as rogue states. This formula had worked well for the United States throughout the latter half of the 20th century and even into the early years of the 21st. But the moment India demonstrated that it could step outside that playbook without facing collapse, the entire world started paying attention. India didn't just flex its muscles by making bold political statements. It backed them up with tangible advancements in its defense capabilities. This wasn't the India of the 1990s, cautiously emerging from economic reforms and relying heavily on external defense imports. This was an India that had invested heavily in indigenous missile systems, advanced air defense technology, and homegrown naval power. Each of these advancements wasn't just about protecting borders, they were strategic symbols telling the world, we don't just defend ourselves, we innovate to stay ahead. When that kind of capability is paired with political will, you have a completely different player on the world stage. The U.S. had been accustomed to countries talking about independence while still being tethered to Washington's technology and supply chains. India broke that mold. It not only developed its own platforms, but also reached out to multiple global partners, creating a network of cooperation that bypassed American oversight. From Russian S-400 missile systems to cutting-edge defense collaborations with France, Israel, and Japan, India built a multi-directional security apparatus. This spread of alliances made it nearly impossible for the U.S. to exert the same kind of singular influence it once could. And that's where the real shift began. The rest of the world could see the cracks in the old order. When other nations observed India taking these steps without facing crippling sanctions or economic ruin, the fear factor that had kept them in check began to dissolve. Small and medium-sized powers, the ones who often felt they had no choice but to align with U.S. interests, began to quietly study India's playbook. They saw a country that not only resisted pressure, but came out stronger, with new trade routes, new energy partnerships, and expanded diplomatic influence. The unspoken message was clear: you can push back against Washington and still thrive if you have the resilience and resources to back it up. It wasn't just about weapons or technology. India's assertiveness was reinforced by its ability to maneuver diplomatically in a way that few nations could. While standing firm against American pressure, it maintained strong relations with Europe, deepened its ties with African nations, and strengthened its role in organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This wasn't reckless defiance, it was calculated independence, backed by layers of economic, technological, and military safeguards. That calculation made India's approach appealing to other nations looking to diversify their own dependencies. The timing of this shift couldn't have been more significant. The world was already in a state of flux, with new power centers emerging and old alliances being tested. China's rise had already unsettled Washington, but Beijing's approach carried an authoritarian image that many nations were hesitant to fully embrace. India, on the other hand, projected itself as a democratic, culturally rich, and strategically independent alternative, a partner that could be trusted without the fear of domination. This image gave India an advantage in winning the confidence of countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In practical terms, India's military innovation sent a signal far beyond its immediate neighborhood. The development of indigenous fighter jets, long-range missiles, and advanced surveillance systems demonstrated that cutting-edge technology was no longer the exclusive domain of a handful of Western powers. Nations that had previously relied on importing outdated systems from major powers began exploring ways to build their own capabilities, often looking to India as a partner in technology sharing. This, in turn, chipped away at the U.S.'s monopoly on setting defense standards for much of the world. The geopolitical ripple effect was immediate. Nations like Indonesia, Egypt, and Brazil started engaging in more diversified arms procurement, balancing purchases from Western suppliers with deals from Russia, China, and now India. Some even initiated domestic defense projects modeled after India's blend of state-led innovation and private sector collaboration. Each of these moves weakened Washington's position as the central hub for military sales and political influence, and each was, in part, inspired by India's example. The U.S., of course, recognized the danger in this trend. If too many countries realized they could follow India's path, the entire structure of post-Cold War geopolitics, where Washington held the role of gatekeeper, would be undermined. This wasn't just about military deals. It was about control over critical decisions on sanctions, trade embargoes, and regional conflicts. The fewer countries that depended on the U.S. for their security and prosperity, the less weight American warnings and threats would carry on the global stage. In regions long considered American spheres of influence, India's stance created space for others to breathe. Latin American countries, often pressured to align with U.S. foreign policy, began cautiously expanding ties with other powers. African nations, historically dependent on Western aid and defense training, now had a visible example of how to chart a sovereign course while still engaging with the U.S. on selective terms. Even some European states, frustrated with American overreach in certain policy areas, began warming to the idea of a more multipolar system where India played a balancing role. This was more than a single diplomatic victory for India. It was a psychological shift for the entire global community. The image of the U.S. as the ultimate arbiter of acceptable behavior had been dented, and while Washington remained a formidable force, the seed had been planted that a nation could stand up, chart its own path, and still be welcomed by a broad coalition of partners. That seed would grow every time another country signed a deal that didn't require American approval. Every time a leader refused to echo Washington's talking points, and every time the U.S. found itself having to negotiate instead of dictate. India's military doctrine, now openly assertive and supported by homegrown innovation, served as both a shield and a banner. It protected the country's independence while signaling to others that the age of unquestioned U.S. authority was fading. The world didn't change overnight, but the direction of movement was unmistakable. Each successful Indian maneuver emboldened others, and each nation that dared to step out of line without immediate punishment contributed to a slow but undeniable rebalancing of global power.